So you decided to make a game, like me last year. But what kind of game are you gonna make? It better look great, right? Gotta sound great too. Definitely in real-time 3D. I mean, is it really a game if there isn't open world, crafting, survival mode, skill trees, random level generation, roguelike or roguelite elements, and lots of story, preferably told through cutscenes? A lot of you might like some or all of those, and I do too. Hell, some of my favorite games are at least a bit like this. It's great to have a lot of features and many hours of playtime. I can guess that's why it's such a common practice to put in everything but the kitchen sink in your game. You want it to be played for hours and hours on end. You want to give people so much playtime, they won't even have the capacity to think about anything else. Just your game, left to completely colonize their brains. You might want to make a game like that, and you know what, that's fine. I don't think I want to do that. I don't think I even can make a game like that, to be honest, for lots of reasons. A lot of these games suffer from the jack of all trades, master of none problem. That's no fault of the developers. They're effectively trying to shove 5 to 10 games worth of mechanics into one box and somehow make it all work. Now this is all likely a me problem, but hey, I'm the one making this video and me-related problems are the only thing I can really be sure of, so that's what you're gonna get. Either way, the game I'm going to make needs to have some focus. It should only have the stuff that's relevant to it and nothing else. If I can help it, that is. Funnily enough, this is the approach I took with the games I made before this one. My previous interactive creations were clones of old arcade games. And that's all they were. No special modes, no noticeable gameplay updates, no story or RPG elements. Just the same stuff that's already out there, except made by me. Derivative by design. With each one of them I abandoned the game once it started to resemble the original, so once the Pong clone looked and played enough like Pong, the Space Invaders clone like Space Invaders, and the Pac-Man clone like Pac-Man, I moved on to the next one. Copying others is a pretty common technique when learning things. Not that's why I chose this path for game development. I just kind of started doing it because it seemed doable and then found I didn't want to stop. I know, doesn't sound illustrious to make rip-offs on purpose, but I don't think I would have the confidence to make Drill Dave if I didn't make these before. That confidence in knowing that I was able to finish something before really does a lot. At least it did for me. After finishing the Pac-Man clone, I thought about what to do next. What would be the next logical thing to follow a game like that? Each time I started on another game, I'd make it a more complicated one. First Pong, then Space Invaders, then Pac-Man, each being more complicated than the next, more features, more difficult to make, and also more interesting. This one would be no exception. Still needs to be manageable though. No sense in trying to go from Pac-Man straight to GTA. So what is more complicated than Pac-Man, but still sort of in the arcade game mold? There's a lot to choose from. Early 80s had a lot of great arcade games, but which one to pick? Oh, am I kidding? I know which one. This was never a contest to begin with. Yeah, I decided on Dig Dug, the 1982 arcade game. More complicated than Pac-Man? Might not look it, but now that I finished the game, I can assure you it is definitely more complicated than Pac-Man. Is it limited in scope? Well, I mean, it's an arcade game from 1982, so of course there's a lot less to it. Back then this was, in a way, about as complicated as you could make a game, so it's definitely feasible for a single person with no budget to finish it in a reasonable amount of time. So, it was settled. I was gonna make a Dig Dug clone. Or was I? You see, before, I didn't see a problem with making nearly exact clones of existing games up to now, but then again I didn't release them. Anywhere. Unless you knew me back then, you likely didn't even know these existed, and you definitely couldn't have played them. Not that you were missing much, they were the same thing you could have gotten from hundreds of different places in likely better quality, with more polish, and less aggravating design decisions. As I said before, I stopped working on them the moment they started to resemble the originals. So for instance, playing my Pong clone is, well, kinda like playing a poor copy of the original Pong. Nothing to be impressed by. They were for me, to get some of my worst game design and game programming habits out of my system, and ensure that the games I'm actually going to ship will at least not make your ears and eyes bleed, possibly give you a cramp from the horrible controls. They were programming and design exercises more than anything else. However, this time I had slightly loftier goals. I wanted this game to be more than just a single level, more than just a proof of concept or proof of competence, something I wouldn't be ashamed to share with the world as much. So it can't just be a clone, it needs to have a little something on top of that, like a story or at least some character. It also needs to have a fair amount of polish, since it's not going to be just me and my friends playing the game. No, this time I decided to release it somewhere. I still needed to keep in mind that focus. I said to myself, I can't start putting in skill trees, elaborate story. Maybe there shouldn't be a shop to buy upgrades. Maybe there shouldn't be any upgrades at all. Gotta keep it manageable if I'm going to finish this thing and keep myself from getting distracted. That is what I told myself a year ago, and I didn't exactly follow this advice. Remember that something about not getting distracted or adding features that didn't need to be there? Yeah, I broke both of those. The finished game has several scripted sequences, a little talking head intro before every level, an extra enemy, both you and enemies can run automatically, and don't even get me started on the various decorations above level or all the stuff that is happening in the code underneath it all. At one point I was even gonna put in a level editor. A level editor! Devlog didn't have any of that. On another hand, it did have more than one tile set, more collectibles, more interesting scoring system, high score table, more levels. In a way it evens out like that, maybe. At the very least, in breaking one rule of mine, I ended up following another one. I didn't make a clone. There's just too much different stuff to classify this game as such. Just too many new features. Yeah, I know, if you squint your eyes you might still think you're looking at Devlog. That is until you hear the sound, which will undeniably give my game away, because it doesn't really sound anything like Devlog. It is, at the very least, more original than every game I've made thus far. Progress? How does one make a game? There's a lot of ways to go about it. From what I've seen out there, it seems like some people have really strong opinions about it. Do it this way or you're doing it wrong. Don't reinvent the wheel. Other people know more than you do. You should let them do it for you. Yeah, that's not how I roll. Don't get me wrong, I would love to tell you that my way is the best way and the only way to achieve true programming excellence and master game development, but that feels really silly, just even saying that. What I'm about to describe is not the right way to do it, or wrong way to do it, it's a way to do it. So, how did I make this game? Well, to put it succinctly, I wrote the entire game in C using SDL2 programming library with as few calls to the C standard library and SDL2 as I could help, always trying to write everything myself from scratch before resorting to use the library function. Either that or cribbing from the code that I wrote for my previous games. The game was primarily developed on a separate Linux machine, then ported to Windows using Mingwe and Cygwin, each version made for x86-64/AMD64 architecture. I used my own format for the graphics, that is just a BMP and a trench code with a minimal header and uncompressed WAV files for audio because laziness. There's also a custom scripting language, although calling it a scripting language would probably make most language experts vomit into their coffee. And that's pretty much it. Alright, that was the fast version, now let's go a little slower. Let's start with that word a lot of you might have been thinking. Engine. Did I use an existing engine, like Unity, Unreal, Godot, or something else? No, I didn't. Now, to be completely honest, I do still use a lot of tools that make the game dev process easier for me. I might not use an engine, but I do use a programming library, a tool that helps me with programming graphics, sound, keyboard input, and lots of other stuff. Unlike most contemporary engines, there's not an app to launch, no editor, no high-level stuff like that. Just a bunch of code that helps me get, for instance, a resizable window on screen, working without having to write tons of code myself. Instead, I just need to write a couple lines and boom, there's the window, resizing itself. Also, it really simplifies porting my game, so if I figure out how to get the library working on Windows, Linux, Mac, Android, PS Vita, iPad, or whatever else you got, it is gonna be a lot easier to port a game there. So, even the way I do it, I don't write everything. Not even close. I'm still dependent on someone else keeping the lights on and not changing their mind about how they let me use their creation. And yes, that means I do learn less than if I did what SDL2 does for me, myself. There's pretty much always going to be something you depend on that you didn't make yourself. There's tons of tools I'd use and didn't create, not to mention the operating systems and the hardware they run on. Unless you're willing to go full crazy scientist and make your own everything, you're likely to be using tools you didn't make, and possibly ones you don't understand that deeply. It's about where you draw a line, and for me that line is about here. Using tools that help me program with less typing, but still allow me to do a lot of stuff myself. I don't mind the programming, I just like if it got me where I want a little faster. That said, even though I have SDL2 to help me, that doesn't mean I went for it every single time. At first, I usually try to do it myself, and then I might go for the SDL2 function if what I made is either too slow, or I spent way too much time on it and it still doesn't work. Sometimes the SDL2 function is slower than what I could have made, but for what I want to do, it's still good enough, so I end up using it. Also, if I can get it working in SDL, it will usually be pretty easy to get it working on both Linux and Windows. Sometimes doing it my way means spending a lot more time fiddling with either the Linux or the Windows port to make sure that it behaves the same way on both, especially Windows. If I use SDL2 instead, I often don't have to worry about that at all. It just works. Most of the time, so far, on this kind of computer, on this kind of operating system, in this part of the country. But if you want to find out more about that, you'll have to wait for at least episode 4. We won't get there right away, that would require a little too much explaining now. Until then, I hope you had fun watching this one. The next episode is going to have some code in it. I know, finally he will get to some code. I wanted to introduce you to the what and how, hence the title. That way you wouldn't miss some of the important context to what I did. I'd also have to explain less in the next one and could just send you to this video should you have questions. If that's how you got here and that's what I did, then congratulations. Now you know, and you can like or hate what I'm doing for the right reasons. See you in the next one.